I bought a $100,000 car with the old man's money.
Right after my husband's funeral, when both my daughter, Sarah, and I were emotionally and physically drained, Madison said this with a grin. My son, Ethan, looked delighted as he stared at the contract Madison had brought home.
Whose money are you talking about? What on earth is going on here?
I couldn't help but snap in frustration, raising my voice. Even though my husband had just passed away and Sarah and I were drowning in grief, my son and his wife seemed more excited than sorrowful.
The insurance payout will come in soon. Plus, there's the inheritance.
Madison said casually, pulling out my husband's bank book from her bag. When I saw it, I couldn't help but burst into laughter.
What's so funny?
You think you'll buy it with that? Good luck with that. Because that bank book is.
Between laughs and struggling for breath, I said something that made Ethan and Madison go totally pale. My name is Amy Wilson. I married my late husband, Jack, and together we had 2 kids, our daughter Sarah, who's the eldest, and our son Ethan. Jack came from a long line of doctors. Both his parents had medical licenses. Jack himself had worked hard from a young age to become a doctor. We met through mutual friends, and I was drawn to his hardworking, selfless nature. That's what brought us together. Our daughter, Sarah, was inspired by Jack's dedication and decided to pursue a career as a doctor too. Though Sarah wasn't naturally talented in academics, she worked tirelessly every day, and as her mom, I watched over her efforts more closely than anyone else. We never forced her to become a doctor. It was her choice, and Jack was overjoyed when she made that decision.
Mom, I got an A ranking for med school.
When Sarah, then in high school, got that A ranking for her dream college, I cried tears of joy, proud of how her efforts had paid off.
Don't get ahead of yourself, Mom. I haven't gotten it yet. I still have to work hard.
Seeing her grow into such a kind and determined young woman made me truly happy. On the other hand, Ethan was the complete opposite of Sarah. Born prematurely, Ethan was a frail child, and I'll admit, I was overly protective of him. However, as he grew, his health improved, and his body caught up to his peers. Without any private tutors, he always aced his elementary school tests, proving he was bright. Watching him grow strong and healthy gave me peace of mind. However, during the latter half of middle school, Ethan started coming home covered in bruises every day.
Ethan, what happened to you?
I was worried. Despite of my worry, he began ignoring me.
Those definitely look like bruises from some rough play. He probably got into a scuffle. You know how boys can be, just let it go. He used to be so little, and now he's throwing punches. It's almost impressive, really. If he's not causing any trouble for others, just leave it alone.
Jack laughed as he said so. Looking back, I wish I'd taken Jack's advice and given Ethan some space. However, having watched over young Ethan with the fear that taking my eyes off him might lead to something irreversible, I couldn't bring myself to think so optimistically. I kept asking him,
Were you in a fight? Who hurt you?
The more I pressed, the more distant Ethan became.
Stop nagging me. If you ask again, I'll never speak to you.
He had a point. I knew I'd been overbearing despite Jack's advice. After that, I backed off and gave Ethan space, but every time an old bruise healed, a new one appeared. Worried but unsure of what to do, all I could do was watch over him. Although Ethan was smart, he spent most of his time getting into fights and ended up attending a local public high school. I thought once he grew out of his teenage phase, we'd be able to talk about his future and college plans, but nothing changed.
Hey, give me some money.
His language was atrocious.
You think acting like a thug makes you cool? You're dead wrong.
Oh yeah? What did you just say?
When Sarah said that, it almost turned into a fight, but the thought of Ethan possibly hurting her made me feel so uneasy I couldn't just stand by.
Please, don't fight. Here, take this. It's for lunch, right?
I quickly pulled a $50 bill from my wallet and handed it to Ethan. Clicking his tongue, he took it and stormed out the door. Sarah glared at him with disdain. How did things end up like this? Was it because I spoiled him too much? Every day, I reflected on my role and how things turned out. Even when his classmates started preparing for college, Ethan didn't change. Jack, clearly frustrated, tried multiple times to talk to him, but Ethan just lashed out with insults, even at his father. Though he never did anything serious enough to involve the police, he was caught by the local authorities more than once for staying out too late with his friends. Eventually, Ethan graduated from high school without any plans for college or a job.
So, Ethan, what's your plan? You're smart, and if you start now, you can still go to college. I'm not saying you have to become a doctor, but you should at least get a job.
By that point, Ethan wouldn't even look me in the eye. A year passed. Ethan, still living at home and jobless, suddenly spoke to me.
Hey,
He probably wanted money again. When I turned to face him, he said something.
I'm having a baby. We're getting married.
The shock left me speechless. Ethan then continued.
I'll get a job for now. Can my wife and I live here?
Wait. I need time to process this. Let's talk it over with your father first.
That evening, Jack, Ethan, and I sat down to discuss it. Ethan's willingness to work and his intent to support his child and wife convinced Jack and me to accept this new addition to our family. The day I was supposed to meet his fiancée, Jack, Sarah, and I waited at home. Ethan had gone to pick her up.
What's taking them so long?
Even after 1 o'clock, the time we had agreed upon, the two of them didn't show up. Could they have been in an accident? Worried, we tried calling, but there was no answer. As we anxiously waited, the two of them finally showed up, casually strolling in just before 3 p.m.
We're back.
Wow, this place is huge. Like, seriously, it's a mansion. Oh, hi there. I'm Madison.
I was stunned by the woman who arrived with Ethan. Despite being pregnant, she was wearing high heels, a short skirt that barely covered her legs, and long, flashy nails. She carried a plastic bag from a baby supply store and greeted us with those words right out of the gate.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm Ethan's mom.
Wow, you're way prettier than Ethan described. Nice to meet ya.
Her lack of basic manners left me too shocked to even feel angry.
So, which room's mine?
We haven't really decided yet.
Okay, then I'll just leave the baby stuff in the living room for now.
With that, Madison walked right into the house and headed for the living room. She spoke to Jack and Sarah in the same casual tone.
The lines at the register were so long. Sorry we're late. You must have been waiting, huh?
When she said this to me after returning to the living room, neither Jack, Sarah, nor I could respond. We just exchanged glances, communicating silently with our eyes.
What? Are you guys nervous or something? Chill out, seriously.
We couldn't do anything but sit there, dumbfounded. What I thought would be a simple introduction turned into Madison piling a ton of luggage in our living room and acting as though she owned the place. Afterward, we formally introduced ourselves to her. She was 22 years old. Worked part-time at a movie theater. She shared that her parents divorced when she was young, and though she was raised by her father, he disappeared later, leaving her to grow up in a foster home. I could understand that her life had been tough with no family to rely on. Plenty of people rise above such circumstances. Even so, that doesn't excuse her rudeness. As Madison talked about her past, Sarah interjected.
How many weeks along are you? I noticed you were wearing high heels earlier. I don't see a baby bump yet, but that's risky, you know.
I was relieved Sarah spoke so directly. But Ethan spoke up in Madison's defense.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. But Madison says heels are the only shoes she owns. Hey, Mom, why don't you buy her some?
Ethan's sudden suggestion startled me.
Oh, no worries. I wouldn't expect you to know my style, so just give me the money, and I'll pick them out myself.
Madison chimed in, completely unfazed. I was at a loss for words at her boldness. Sarah yelled at the two of them.
Why should Mom have to buy them? Ethan, you should buy them for her.
But the baby I'm carrying is your grandchild, you know?
So what? It's still your baby.
Wow, so scary. Is this what having a sister-in-law is like? Hilarious.
Sarah was furious at Madison's flippant comment, while Jack sat silently, his lips pressed in a tight line. What an audacious person. Her attitude made it seem like she was mocking us, her fiancé's family. Still, we had to live with her. Starting off on bad terms wouldn't help anyone. I tried to believe that, as time went on, she'd develop some maternal instincts, learn to be a parent, and grow into a responsible adult. Surely, she'd give up wearing heels and flashy nails eventually. At least, that's what I hoped. Sarah, as a doctor, seemed particularly frustrated by Madison's lack of awareness about her responsibilities as a parent.
Anyway, earn some money before your baby bump starts showing and buy your own shoes. And take off those nails. If you can't use a pulse oximeter, they'll just rip them off in an emergency.
With that, Sarah stormed out of the living room and locked herself in her room. Madison smirked at Sarah's reaction, and Ethan shrugged,
Don't worry about it. She's just jealous I'm getting married first.
making Madison laugh. With that, our life together began. Madison went to her part-time job, but never did the household work. She used her pregnancy as an excuse to spend her days off lounging around. Ethan, as promised, started working, but it was a revolving door of jobs. He'd get into fights, quit, and then find another part-time gig. It was exhausting to deal with. Jack, however, said nothing to either of them. I assumed he had simply given up on them. Then, something unexpected happened to Jack. About a month before Madison's delivery date, after we had prepared everything for the baby, Jack collapsed at work. Despite immediate medical attention, he didn't make it. Even though I had looked forward to the new addition to our family, the idea that Jack wouldn't get to meet his grandchild was unbearable. I was devastated, more than I could have ever expected, and Sarah stepped up to support me. With her encouragement, I managed to organize Jack's funeral. On the morning of the funeral, I spoke to Madison.
You can stay home today. I know it must be hard with your condition.
Really? Sweet. I'll stay home then.
In this part of the country, there's a tradition that discourages pregnant women from attending funerals. Since Madison was in her final month of pregnancy and anything could happen at any time, I told her to stay home out of concern for her well-being. She happily accepted my suggestion. It was my idea. So I had no reason to complain, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease as I headed to the funeral home. Ethan, arriving late, kept texting Madison on his phone, clearly worried about her. I did scold him once, but since the baby could come at any moment, I decided to let it go during the ceremony. By the time the funeral ended and we returned home, I was utterly drained, both physically and emotionally. But something happened as Sarah and I sat in the living room in a daze, discussing what to do about dinner. Madison came downstairs and handed Ethan some papers.
Hey, how was it? Did the old man make it to heaven?
She giggled as she asked, and Ethan chuckled in response.
More like hell.
Do you both understand that we just returned from a funeral? What are you even saying?
Sarah snapped, but I didn't have the energy to get upset anymore.
Relax, Sarah. I'll give you a ride sometime.
With that, Madison pointed at the papers she had just handed Ethan. Naturally, Sarah and I turned our eyes to the documents.
What is that? And what do you mean? Give me a ride.
Look. We just bought a $100,000 car with the old man's money.
We stared at her, stunned. Ethan, however, didn't seem surprised and was happily flipping through the papers.
Whose money did you say? What is going on here?
I couldn't hold my frustration and raised my voice. While Sarah and I were grieving Jack's death, Ethan and Madison looked downright gleeful.
The insurance money will be deposited soon, right? And there's the inheritance too.
Madison said with a smug smile as she pulled out a bank book from her bag.
Wait. Is that Jack's bank book? Madison, did you go through the house and steal that while we were out?
Don't make it sound so bad. We're family, so it's not stealing. Besides, Ethan told me where it was. Right, Ethan?
Madison replied shamelessly. It became clear that Ethan was complicit. I couldn't believe how pathetic my son had become. I never thought it would come to this. Though I hung my head in despair, I lifted my gaze to look at the bank book that Madison was holding. Sure enough, Jack's name was written on it. However, looking at it closely, something about it seemed off. When I realized what it was, I couldn't hold back my laughter.
Ha!
Once I started laughing, I couldn't stop. It had been so long since I'd laughed like this. As I burst out laughing, Madison scowled at me.
What's so funny?
She's finally lost it.
Ethan sneered, but I wasn't feeling any anger towards him at that stage. I'd always thought Ethan was smart, but clearly, I'd been wrong. Their sheer stupidity was almost pitiable.
So, you're planning to buy the car, huh? Did you already sign the contract? Are you relying on that for your payment? Good luck with that. Did you even check the balance?
Hearing this, Ethan snatched the bank book from Madison and opened it.
What the? This can't be right. There's only $3 in here.
Wait, what?
The two of them stared at the bank book in disbelief, their faces pale. Yes. That account had already been emptied and was on the verge of being closed.
You've got to be kidding me. There's got to be an inheritance. Where is it?
And the insurance money. That should have been deposited by now.
Ethan began to shout in anger. Madison chimed in, panicked.
Yes, there's an inheritance and insurance money.
Jack's parents had passed away early, and what he inherited along with the wealth he accumulated was substantial. Jack wasn't just a regular doctor. He was a founder and owner of multiple hospitals, with total assets amounting to over $11 million. However, those were assets Jack built, not cash in hand.
Most of those assets have been donated. Jack always said he wanted the money patients paid for treatment to go toward helping others.
What?
You didn't know? It was even in the papers. He made a significant donation.
Ethan began trembling with frustration. He never cared about family or read the news. It wasn't surprising he hadn't known.
Besides, the remaining funds are in an online bank account. They can't be accessed without going through the proper inheritance procedures anyway.
What about the insurance money? When will that be deposited?
Madison, clutching the bank book, stepped closer to me, almost desperate. That's when Sarah started laughing from beside me.
Don't you know? Insurance payouts don't go into the deceased's account. They go to the beneficiaries' accounts, mine and Mom's.
Madison's grip on the bank book loosened, and it fell to the floor with a soft thud. Ethan stood frozen in shock. Sarah and I exchanged a glance and burst into laughter.
What are we supposed to do? The car's already been ordered. We added so many options, and they also said we can't cancel it.
Mom, please, just this once lend us the money.
Ethan begged, dropping to his knees beside her. It had been so long since he called me Mom. It felt so odd, like a stranger was asking for help.
I don't know. Figure it out yourselves.
I coldly brushed them off. On that very day, I couldn't bring myself to tolerate their behavior. I was sure Jack would have felt the same way.
Mom, let's just go to bed. We're both exhausted.
Yeah, I'm not in the mood for dinner either.
We stood up. Leaving the two of them sweating nervously in the living room, we headed to our rooms. It turned out that during the funeral, Ethan had been in constant contact with Madison to finalize the car purchase. I thought he'd been worried about her health, but clearly, the car mattered more to them than the baby. Before Jack passed, he'd made it clear he didn't want Ethan or Madison to receive a cent from his estate. As planned, the insurance money was deposited into accounts for Sarah and me. Jack had been relatively young to pass away, but seeing how unreliable Ethan remained even after starting a family, he'd carefully prepared a will. The will designated the house, real estate, and most of the remaining cash to me. Sarah was named as the successor to Jack's hospital and inherited his personal investment assets. Ethan was left with a large plot of land in the countryside. When we opened and read the will, Madison immediately exclaimed,
Well, can't we sell the land and buy the car with that?
Let me finish reading.
I said firmly, cutting her off, and continued.
Your dad left you that land, plus $100,000 for building a house, but it comes with a condition: you have to leave the house.
What? What does that even mean?
We were at the family court. The will had already been authenticated and held full legal power as an official document.
What do you mean? It's exactly what it says. You're getting land and money to build a house, so you should be grateful.
But isn't the house supposed to go to Ethan, the eldest son, eventually?
Madison turned to me, pleading for support as she spoke. I simply smiled and said,
It's mine now, and I'll decide who it goes to.
You're such a witch!
Well, you better head back and start packing.
Not to mention, the land Jack specified for Ethan was a remote property about 30 miles from here, deep in the mountains. While it was a large piece of land, most of it was overgrown forest. With the $100,000 in building funds, they wouldn't be able to build anything more than a small house. If nothing had been left to them, they would have undoubtedly caused a huge commotion over inheritance rights. Perhaps Jack anticipated this and chose that land for Ethan. While I don't know his exact intentions, I believe Jack wanted to ensure that Sarah and I could live peacefully. Besides, Ethan and Madison had no right to receive anything at all. So they should have been thankful they got something. A few days later, the baby was born. Madison's amniotic fluid broke in the middle of the night at home. Sarah quickly called the hospital, and Madison was rushed there. Unfortunately, her blood pressure dropped, and with limited staff available at that hour, Sarah had to step in and perform an emergency C-section herself. Despite Sarah's repeated warnings, Madison refused to remove her long acrylic nails. The nurses had to forcibly tear them off.
No! I just got these redone 3 days ago. Don't take them off.
Madison reportedly screamed during the chaos.
Madison, stop moving. The amniotic fluid is leaking faster.
Sarah later told me that dealing with Madison's tantrum was more exhausting than the surgery itself. Although I've never worn flashy nails like that, it sounded incredibly painful. Something she brought upon herself. Madison complained about the ordeal, but having her and the baby's lives saved left her unable to challenge Sarah anymore. Though Madison still seemed upset over the inheritance, her attitude toward us softened considerably. After the hospital stay, We allowed her to rest for a month postpartum, and she should have been grateful for that kindness.
Mom, Sarah, we're sorry for everything. Can we stay here? We don't need the land or the money.
No, if you stay here with your minimal income, you won't contribute anything financially. Letting you live here would cost us more than $100,000 in the long run.
Ethan pleaded with tears in his eyes, but neither Sarah nor I wavered. Naturally, they couldn't buy the car either. Reluctantly, Ethan canceled the purchase, only to be hit with a $10,000 penalty, which he had to pay from the building funds. Apparently, they didn't want to move to the countryside. They considered selling the land to rent an apartment, but with high rents in the area and no buyers for the largely forested plot, they were left with no other option. Realizing they had no choice but to follow the will and build a house on the land, Ethan and Madison have been desperately searching for a contractor willing to build a house for $90,000. However, it seems they haven't had much success.
You two are only here because the baby is still so small. If I wanted to, I could ask you to leave right now.
Ethan fell silent at my words. A week later, they finally found a contractor. However, the only thing they could afford was a tiny prefabricated house. Given Madison's track record, I couldn't imagine her keeping even a small house clean, so a small house should suffice. The moving date was set, and as they prepared to leave, I turned to them and said,
You'll need to figure out daycare and settle in first. Until then, we can take care of the baby. Focus on becoming responsible parents.
What? You're trying to take our baby away from us? You monster.
Madison, who had been quiet recently, shouted furiously. Ethan stopped her.
There's no way I can support both of you on my income alone. Let's leave the baby here until we get settled.
No way. If that's the case, I want a divorce.
Even if we divorced, you have nowhere to go. Calm down.
It seemed Ethan was finally starting to face reality. He was desperately trying to calm Madison, who was red-faced and furious.
Don't make it sound so bad. I never said I'd take the baby away. If you can take her with you, then go ahead.
I smirked, my nose held high, while Madison bit her lip in frustration but eventually fell silent. She must have realized they had no choice but to temporarily leave the baby behind. Shortly after, the two of them quietly packed their belongings and left the house. While I did feel a little sorry for their child, I couldn't help but think that having parents like them wouldn't make much of a difference. Of course, if Ethan and Madison were to genuinely turn their lives around and prove they could take care of their daughter, I'd gladly entrust her to them, but I believed she might be better off with Sarah and me. Since moving to their new home, Ethan and Madison have been in touch almost daily. I'd gladly respond if they were asking about their daughter, but all their messages are just pleas for money. When I ignore them, they send photos of their dinner, which is usually just cheap snack bread, presumably to gain pity. Seeing those, Sarah would laugh and say,
If they get sick, they won't even be able to afford medical bills.
Living in the countryside means having a car is essential. They bought a pre-owned car for $3,000, which apparently stalls constantly. They say it to try to gain our sympathy, but little do they know it's become a source of amusement for Sarah. Given their current state, it's clear they're in no position to come and take their child back, but honestly, I'm happy to live with my sweet granddaughter. She turned 3. At her most adorable age, she's nothing like Ethan or Madison. She's kind, well-behaved, and incredibly bright. She's putting in a lot of effort, diligently practicing numbers with the puzzle Sarah bought for her, and she already can read simple words. Meanwhile, Ethan and Madison are still living day to day. Even when I send them pictures of their daughter, their responses are things like,
So cute.
as if she's just a doll to them. It's clear they're still far from being real parents. I hope that when my granddaughter grows up, She can learn from her parents' mistakes and use them as a cautionary example, so she can grow up strong and straight.